All right, TAP Human Geography. We are going to make some progress in the notes here, okay? Going to walk you through, well, if I can get through this, let's say, put it that way. Walk you through a couple other theories about how we see power distributed and how we see states and countries make use of this power, kind of where we left things off in class. We were talking about number one up there. Ratzel. Actually, it was Friedrich Ratzel and the organic theory, and how we can use the organic theory to explain the beginnings of World War II. All right, left it off. We're talking about Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, their demand for Lebensraum, living space, all that kind of business. All right, our second one, and this is going to be a theory that is put forth by another more like a political scientist, not as much a geographer, although he's definitely making some use of some geography, and that is Sir Halford Mackinder. Okay, Mackinder, I guess I should say, and he's British, and he is going to be the one who develops the Heartland Theory. Okay, if you look at the map over there on the right side, it's kind of showing you where the heartland is considered to be, and it's kind of an area that a lot of times you'll hear described as Eurasia because it's part of Europe and then it kind of bleeds over into Asia. And what he theorizes is that if you look through the stretch of history from way back, going back to the Mongols and that kind of thing, Napoleon, right on up into the 20th and 21st century, that there's always been this push-pull and this conflict that has brewed up from time to time, including the conflict we see right now between Russia and Ukraine over this area that is referred to as the heartland. And this is kind of this very, very geographic land-based kind of a theory about how power emanates from whoever controls the heartland. Okay, those of you that brave AP World next year, we learn about land-based empires kind of early in world history, kind of 13th, 14th, 15th century, and kind of through that reign, that area. And so this it focuses on Eastern Europe, particularly Russia, and then into Central Asia. That is all that heartland they call there. And it really, it gets to this this idea that, if you control the heartland, then you can have a control over Eurasia. And so why we see, Hitler invading the Soviet Union during World War II, he's trying to gain control over that heartland. Even though he's also yelling about Lebensraum and that other thing. And if we look at some of the other kind of conflicts that have gone down through history, and even the fighting, like I said, that's going on between Russia and Ukraine is taking place, technically speaking, in this heartland area. All right, and so that again, it's you control the heartland, and then that sets you up for even more geographic dominance. To be a state that can have all this power and begin to build an actual empire. Okay, kind of like we're talking about with the risk game. A third theory is going to come from a Dutch American by the name of Nicholas Spijkman, and his is the Rimland theory. And if we focus over on that map on the right side, you can see where the Rimland is located. And maritime that I have there, when you see that word maritime, it refers to the sea. Okay, and so yes, I could have said sea-based or ocean-based, but I need to give you some more vocabulary to kind of focus in on. And this is vocabulary that'll pop up in AP World and quite frankly in a lot of other kind of classes as well. So it's a term you should be familiar with if you're not already. And so this is kind of like a bookend theory that goes along with Mackinder's Heartland theory, but it's more of a focus on the idea that whoever controls the rimland, and truly this is kind of what he proposed, is that who rules the rimland, all those kind of lands that you see that have all that water access. You've got the ability to build ports and harbors and all that kind of thing. And that's what Spijkman said is, whoever rules the Rimland, rules Eurasia. If you have control over all of this, you're actually going to have control over all of this. So he's saying, forget about Mackinder. It's kind of crazy. No, you want to control this. where Mackinder is saying, no, you want the heartland. So, these are two theories that kind of, give you two different ways of thinking. And yeah, they are kind of at odds with each other. They don't really, ease up right up against each other. But, what he's saying is if you have that access to the sea, that opens the doors to greater power. So ultimately what he says is who rules the Rimland rules Eurasia, and who rules Eurasia controls the world. Okay. I know that's kind of like, wow, that took a big leap. But, that's kind of what they're thinking here with these theories is, this is how countries, how they think, how they operate, how these states operate, whether they're operating independently or whether they're building empires to do that. Okay, so organic, heartland, and rimland theories. You're going to want to know what each of them is. You want to know kind of the differences between them. And then you can also think about the similarities, that all of them are proposed to kind of explain why history has played out the way that it has, and why we've seen this kind of rise and fall of empires, why we've seen, leaders like Adolf Hitler or Napoleon who seem to be motivated by wanting to control vast amounts of territory beyond their own state borders. That's what these kind of theories are trying to explain and deal with. All right. Okay. Down there at the bottom, kind of explaining how we can see territoriality and how it impacts culture. Okay. And I don't know. Hopefully, we're not getting this. Are we getting this interference on my screen? I don't know. I'm seeing some interference on my side. Hopefully, you're not. And if you are seeing it down there along the bottom there, I'm sure you can kind of read that. But otherwise, you're kind of like, what are you talking about, Floyd? Anyhow, I don't know. I'm seeing some stuff on my screen that's kind of gunking up the bottom here. So getting back to what in here is that when we see territoriality, this wanting, this desire to defend territory, when we introduce culture into that, we can get some really complex conflicts come out of it, and something that we learn about quite a bit. And its impact over world history. We learn about this in AP World, is that split that we talked about when we were dealing with religion back in Unit 3. And, when we look at Islam and we see that divide that takes place many, many years ago, but still has an impact to this very day. There have been a history of wars that have been fought over that Sunni-Shia split in the religion of Islam. And some of these go back to the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire and other empires in the Middle East. In more current times, we have seen conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and a war that's taken place in the Middle Eastern country of Yemen. It is an example of one of those proxy wars that we talked about, where Saudi Arabia, they are supporting Sunni Muslims, and Iran is supporting Shia Muslims in this civil war that's been going on, this fighting that's been happening in Yemen. So, that's how we can sometimes see where territoriality can collide with religion, an aspect of culture, and also end up resulting in some conflict. All right. We also can see how territoriality has some connections to economics. And, the example that I give you is going back to the 1980s when there was a war that was fought between England and Argentina over some islands, the Falkland Islands off the coast of Argentina. The British had claimed them, going back to about the 18th century, 19th century. I'd have to look it up, but they had an old claim on it. But Argentina also claimed it as theirs. And possession of the islands did mean, possession of, sea lanes for transportation, but it also gave rights to the potential for, oil, mining for oil underwater, fishing rights, things like that. And the two countries went to war over possession of the Falklands. Ultimately, England won that war. It was a very short little war. And still maintains control over the Falkland Islands to this very day. Okay, we've also seen this kind of economic territoriality play out in the South China Sea, where a whole bunch of countries, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and China, have all claimed parts of the South China Sea, and a lot of the same issues come up: fishing rights, potential access to oil, shipping lanes, those kinds of things. So And sometimes, I mean, like I said, with the Falkland Islands, I mean, it boils over into full out war. What we see in the South China Sea has not resulted in armed conflict, but there have been concerns raised from time to time that it could potentially end up that way someday. All right, hold on, clear myself out here as we shift gears and move on into a completely different direction. You covered some of this, I believe, in chapter 8, I think, in your textbook. But now we are going to, totally shift gears, and we're going to take a look at boundaries, okay? The ways that we see states, countries, sometimes nations, separate themselves, and then all of our other little, all of our other smaller political entities, whether they might be autonomous, semi-autonomous, multi-state, all the little gamut of them. All right. And so what we're going to do with this is pretty much we'll start with just the basic, what is the definition of a boundary? And when we look at the territory that a state controls, boundary is basically, well, like the image says, where their space ends and someone else's space begins. And so that's the big definition. And then we give it the APHUG treatment, okay, which means we are going to get into all kinds of nitpicky types of boundaries. And yes, you're going to need to know these, okay? When I get you guys your next vocab list next week, you're going to be so happy to see all of these showing up. And, I'll have some version of these definitions, but they'll probably go into a little bit more detail. So, types of boundaries. Yes, sometimes we have types of boundaries that are called defined boundaries. Defined boundaries, okay? And a defined boundary is that a boundary that is established by a treaty between two states, two countries, is established by a legal documents that both sides agree to. It's how most boundaries that exist on the planet, they are defined boundaries. There's no doubt about them. Everyone agrees to them, and they're respected. All right. We look at our boundaries between Washington and Oregon. We look at our boundaries between, the United States and Canada. We don't threaten war against each other because, Canada's claiming territory that we say is ours and vice versa. There have been wars in the past over that, though. Okay. You guys, by the time you're juniors, whether you take APHUG or American history, U.S. history, you'll learn, that had some impact into the War of 1812. Sometimes but what most of us deal with, defined boundaries. Okay. Delimited boundaries. When we talk about delimited, so lines on a map, limits of space. So think of this in small scale. When we think about, in the United States and we think of states, and I'll say that kind of like small s states, not states like, what we've learned about already, our kind of more formal term for describing a country. Whether we're talking about, the boundaries between, Washington and Idaho, Washington and Oregon, Oregon and California. We can think of those as being delimited boundaries. We can look inside of Washington and look at the boundaries for our different counties. Okay, as we go from Clark County, I forget who directly borders us, but as we look at all the different counties, we can even break it down further into like our electoral precincts that we have in Washington State, our electoral districts. All of those have lines drawn on a map that show the limits of space for each of them. And those would all be examples of delimited boundaries, right? Demarcated boundaries. These are kind of easier ones to think about because, it kind of speaks for itself. This is when we actually build something to show where, that one space ends and the other space begins. Sometimes it's just signage, every day when I'm crossing the bridge over the Columbia River, I see the Welcome to Washington sign. And then on the way home, I see the Welcome to Oregon sign. I can say that those are giving me evidence of a demarcated boundary. Okay. I don't have to cross a wall or a fence when I'm going across the boundaries between our two states, but I do see something. There's a sign. All right. that's reminding me that I'm leaving one and now entering the other. Okay, when we get to boundaries, though, I mean, if we look at the boundary right now between the United States and Mexico, there are sections of it that are divided by actual walls or some kind of fencing material. And so we see, that form of a demarcated boundary between the U.S. and Mexico. We see that in places between us and Canada, but in other places, the demarcation is simply signage. All right. My other picture on the left side there is showing the Berlin Wall that was enacted during the Cold War, was built between East Berlin and West Berlin. And East Berlin was controlled by the Soviet Union, kind of, satellite state kind of an idea. And then West Berlin wasn't really controlled by anyone, but was kind of free part side of Berlin that had a little bit more influence coming from the United States, the British, the French on the other side. But they literally built a physical wall to separate East Berlin from West Berlin, and then put fencing up between East Germany and West Germany back in the day. All right, so that's demarcation, and then a natural border or boundary, is one that is based on physical geography. And I just mentioned, I think the most obvious one for us. I mean, I crossed that Columbia River, and that is a natural border between Washington and Oregon. Okay, to think of it that way. I think that makes that one. And then down over on the right side, talk about the Rio Grande River, or the Rio Grande, if I'm going to say that properly. And that does delineate part of the boundary between the United States and Mexico. Not all of it, but at least part of it. Okay, so that is there. And then a geometric boundary. Yeah, straight line. When we have those really, the simple ones, the perfect ones. Think about the boundary that we have between Washington and Canada. Okay, I mean, it's just a straight line up there. We have part of our boundary, even our boundary between Washington and Idaho, pretty much straight line. Those are geometric boundaries. And so sometimes you'll see those. I think I've got my example there of, over in Indonesia, that one as well. So sometimes you have those geometric boundaries. Cultural boundaries. These ones, man, these are tough ones to figure out. Sometimes I show you a map over there of kind of the area of where Serbia and Kosovo, the Balkans region, and you can see just this mishmash of colors, all these different boundaries, and these are all cultural, and so it has to do with different ethnicities. Some of it's kind of more religious, some of it's more like nationality. And so, but those don't line up with any state boundaries, any of our defined boundaries and that sort of thing. And so a lot of times they're like the definition goes, they're very ambiguous. They, people can kind of debate on them. They're not really, you're not going to see just these, they're not defined at all. Okay. So of all of them that I cover there, the cultural ones are definitely a little bit more in that gray area. Okay. All right. As well as, all these different types of boundaries, we also have a bunch of classifications that go with boundaries as well. The first one is what we call antecedent. Okay. Antecedent boundaries. And so these are examples of boundaries that are drawn a long time ago, and a lot of times when populations were still kind of small, and then a lot of times kind of grow really large after that. I give you the example there of Malaysia and Indonesia, but I could also look at our boundary that is drawn between us and Canada along the 49th parallel. It was drawn back in the early 19th century. It was drawn at a time when there were very few American settlers. There was probably more Native American people living in the region than there were actually settlers who had, come in to take advantage of, new farmland and things like that. There were not many settlers over up on the Canadian side. as well. Again, probably more First Nation people that were living up there. But then over time, populations have filled in. But we haven't changed that boundary. The boundary still looks the same, and so it's a very old boundary, given the history of our country and Canada. But it's kind of stood the test of time as populations have grown larger. Okay, antecedent is how we pronounce it. A subsequent boundary is one that we usually end up drawing or placing onto a map because of, well, you've got it there, mainly because of religious differences, or it might have something to do with ethnicities or even language differences. I think the example that actually I'll talk to you about with number two, if we look at Ireland, okay, and Ireland is actually divided into basically two states, Ireland and Northern Ireland, all right? And the division, while there are political aspects to it, Northern Ireland is far more attached to England, to the British government, and Ireland is basically independent. But there is a big religious aspect to this. The vast majority of the Irish population are Catholic, and the vast majority of the population of Northern Ireland are Protestants. That's ended up resulting in conflict down through the years. But I mean, that is a large part of why that boundary is drawn on there in Ireland, that territory dividing the land into Ireland and Northern Ireland. So the boundary between Ireland and Northern Ireland we would describe as a subsequent boundary. Okay. A relic boundary, and sometimes you'll find some sources that will call it a relict. They put a T on the end of it. I don't know. I'm going with relic boundary. And that is one that, is a boundary that's from a long time ago, or, maybe a little more recent. Doesn't matter. It's kind of more of a historically based boundary, but no longer exists. Okay. What I'm showing you over there in that picture on the right side is the city of Berlin in Germany. And after Germany was defeated in World War II, the country and the capital city was divided up between the four victorious countries of World War II. And so that's why you see what's called a Soviet sector, French, British, and American sector. Each of the winning allies in World War II were given a chunk of Berlin to control. And then it was up to each of those countries to decide when they wanted to, or if they wanted to, grant independence, basically German control back over it. And that story gets very complicated and one we don't really need to go into. But that was truly, I just mentioned to you back on the prior slide, the Berlin Wall. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell down, was brought down. I shouldn't say fell down. No, it was torn down with the fall of communism in East Germany and the reunification of Germany in the early 90s. The wall came down. Okay, and so that boundary no longer exists. But if you go to Berlin today, there are still sections of the wall that are still up, mainly for historic purposes, almost kind of like, memorializing it, basically to say, hey, this is part of our history, here's the evidence of it, that sort of a thing. And so if you go to visit that, and a lot of people do, a lot of tourists go there, have their pictures taken, in front of some of those remaining chunks of the wall that are still standing. But what they're standing in front of is a relic boundary. Okay, that's what we're talking about with that. And then superimposed boundaries. And we've been working with imperialism. You guys are still working with imperialism with that casement assignment that I gave you. Those boundaries that Europeans, when they got together in Berlin, that Berlin conference, and they rolled out the big map of Africa and completely ignored any boundaries that the ethnic Africans themselves may have drawn between different tribes, different kingdoms, any of that, and they just started drawing lines on the map. This chunk goes to you, Germany. This chunk goes to you, England. This chunk goes to you, France. Doing that. What they were drawing were superimposed boundaries, right? They're paying no attention to what's on the ground. They're simply just here you go, here you go. Here you go, right? That's what we mean by that, just drawn by outside powers. Superimposed. Militarized boundaries. Pretty self-explanatory there, okay? And probably the most militarized boundary in the world is what is called the demilitarized zone. Demilitarized zone, the DMZ, that exists between North and South Korea. Okay, both sides have this strip of territory, the boundary between those two states, those two countries, and 24/7, 365 days a year, both sides have a heavy troop, presence there at the border. Both sides. Well, no, I shouldn't say both sides. Mainly, it's been North Korea that has, over the years, has continually threatened South Korea. We're coming back. We're going to drag you in. We're going to be one Korea again, and we're all going to live happily ever after under communism. That kind of thing. Which South Korea pretty much says, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to get across our boundary first, and you're going to pay because we've got all these troops. We got, we still even have an American presence. We have been an ally and a helper to South Korea since the Korean War back in the 1950s. And so we even have U.S. military personnel over in South Korea that help to support that militarized boundary. Okay, probably the best example for militarized boundary that I can give you. And then an open boundary. This is really what we see in a lot of Europe right now, although a lot of European countries are reconsidering it. It's kind of a policy that most of the European Union adopted a number of years ago. They agreed to completely open boundaries, that you can cross over from France over to Germany, from Germany over to Belgium. And you don't have to stop at checkpoints and show your passport and go through customs, which, any of you who have ever traveled internationally, you know what that's about. You got to, if you're at the airport, you got to go stand in a line. You have to hand over your passport to a customs agent who's going to make sure that, you're there for legit purposes, whether it's to be a tourist or you're there for business. It's to make sure that you're not there, to, excuse me, to, do something like, carry out a terror attack or something like that. Okay. For countries that don't even require that, you can travel freely without having to go through that process. They are operating with what we would just call open borders, okay, or open boundaries. All right. Okay. Let's see if I can. I'm gonna just take us down to the bottom of this slide, and we're gonna be in over 30 minutes by then. So I'm probably gonna hit the brakes there. All right. Let's see. When we talk about the kind of disputes, the kind of arguments, and sometimes the wars that break out over issues and kind of problems that arise because of boundaries. Here we go. I'm going to cover 4 of them with you here, and then we'll call her good. A definitional boundary dispute is pretty much where you have, like it says there, a disagreement over what both sides believe, how they interpret a mapped boundary. And although Chile and Argentina have never gone to war, when you get down to kind of down here into the southern part of the boundary between those two countries, it's very, very mountainous, right? There's not a lot of people that live in there because it is just the territory is just rugged and, very, it's snowy and cold and it's brutal. And so without many people living there, it makes kind of trying to determine where exactly, where does Chile end and where does Argentina begin? And every once in a while they get into these little spats about where the actual boundary lies. But because there's not a whole lot at stake, it's not like they've got oil discovered or, anything like that. And there's no major population centers. It's never spilled into open warfare. But it is an example of a definitional disagreement because they are in disagreement about where, the boundary where it actually lies. Okay. A locational boundary. Hold on just a sec here. All right. Sorry. Quick disruption there. All right. Anyhow, we were talking about locational boundary disputes. And so this is kind of taking a definitional to the next level. Okay. And this is where two countries, I mean, having a it's not because there's some vagaries because of geography. I mean, this is two countries just saying, one saying the boundary is right here, on a map, and another country saying no, I mean, you're claiming, 25 miles of our territory. We say the boundary is here. And when we get down to the what we talked about already, organic theory, the beginning of World War II, when Hitler was making those claims for territory, the Lebensraum, Poland was going to be the first country that was going to deal with this straight on, and this was going to be the beginning of World War II when Germany claimed that that Poland, where the boundary lied between Germany and Poland, was not in the same place where Poland claimed it, and really where most of the rest of the world recognized it to be. What Hitler was also claiming was a kind of related to this, and that is the concept of irredentism. He also claimed that Germans, nationally speaking, were located on both sides of the border between Germany and Poland. And so when he declared war against Poland, yes, part of it was for Lebensraum, but part of it was also because he claimed that these German nationals who were, living in Poland deserved to be living in Germany. And so instead of just telling those national Germans, pick up and move to Germany, in effect, he's saying, you stay where you're at. Germany's coming to you. We're going to invade this territory, and boom, you'll be Germans before you know it, living under German-controlled territory. Okay? So irredentism is that idea of whether it's attacking or taking some kind of an action to reunite people who have the same nationality as you, but who may be located across another boundary. And a lot of times we see irredentism play out in the form of warfare, like we see Germany invading Poland in part to reunite those Germans and make sure that they're in German territory. Okay, woo, complicated, I know. All right, let's get these last couple here, and we'll be done. An operational boundary dispute. How a border functions, and we're just going to go with Exhibit A. Woo, the border between the United States and Mexico. Okay, you ever get the family together for Thanksgiving or Christmas or something? Hey, you want to get an interesting conversation going? You just throw out there, how about the border between U.S. and Mexico? And then just, get a bag of popcorn and watch the fireworks. It is a very push button, kind of a hot issue in the United States. People have very strong opinions all over the place as far as, how we should operate our boundary between the United States and with Mexico. And yes, we definitely have an operational dispute. And sometimes the dispute really is not between us and Mexico. A lot of times the dispute is even Americans and Americans who disagree on how the boundary should operate. Who should we let through? Who should we reject? Who are the kind of people that we want to give them a chance to become American citizens? What do we do with people who sneak across the border, who are here illegally? All those kinds of issues come up when we're talking about an operational boundary dispute. Okay. And like I said, no better example to look at than the boundary that we share down south between ourselves and Mexico. Alrighty. And then the last one is an allocational boundary dispute. And natural resources that extend across a border. Okay. Think about it's just like multi-state in a way, but now we're talking about a natural resource like oil, which is going to be the example I'm going to show you over there on the left side. In the green up above is the Middle Eastern country of Iraq. Down below them is the Middle Eastern country of Kuwait. Okay, in the early 1990s, Iraq launched an invasion of Kuwait. And the reason for doing this was because Iraq claimed that there were basically oil beds underground, underground oil, it's where the oil comes from, that started up, they say, starts in Iraq and crosses underground, across the border into Kuwait, and that Kuwait was drilling Iraq's soil, or oil, sorry, from their side of the boundary. Okay, it's almost kind of like, if it's like you and your friend are trying to share a milkshake, and you each have a straw, and your friend is drinking more than you are, and it's like, hey, it's not fair. I mean, in a weird sense, it's kind of what Iraq is claiming, and they started a war against Kuwait over this. Kind of blew up into a whole. I mean, the good part of the world, United States, we got involved. Ended up resulting in the first Persian Gulf War back in the early 1990s, as countries worked to get Iraq out of Kuwait and let Kuwait kind of get its freedom again, its independence. But the war started because of a natural resource dispute. And the fact that Iraq was claiming, that Kuwait was stealing their oil from underground. All right, strange. I know it sounds strange, but it's fact. It's true. Look it up, kids. All right. Anyhow, that describes, and the best example I can give you that comes to mind, of an allocational boundary dispute. Okay. All right. I'm 36 minutes in. Sorry, guys. But that will give us, that'll put us just a little bit closer where we need to be. Make sure and get all these notes in your notebook. Hopefully I gave you plenty of extra information so you can have a jam-packed left column. And we will continue on. When we pick up back in class, we're still going to be on the topic of boundaries. We're just going to start looking at kind of influences when we look at boundaries. All right, but that'll cover us for now. Thanks, and we'll see you back in class.